Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are about to begin our session titled Words and Images of the Day. The speakers are Olivier Truck, Barkha Dutt, Farhan Bukhari and Fasi Ahmed.
In that order, Ajay.
The moderator for this session will be Ghazi Salahuddin. Please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion. And we would appreciate if complete silence is observed while the session is in progress. Ghazi Salahuddin is a senior journalist, writer, literary figure and political analyst. Bas itna to, aur nahi bolna.
Thank you so much. Let's begin the session. And if you are wondering what this title of the session means, Words and Images of the Day, then you are not alone. I think it is to Barkha should be interested in this session, because we had this session earlier in the day in which she made the observation that in the media things are very simplistic and binary view, and there is I mean the complexity of issues is not explored. So we got it for you, Barkha. We have some complexity here. So let me first introduce our panelist, Mr. Olivier Turk.
Almost.
Got it right. Okay.
Olivier Truc. It's better and better.
And he's a very prominent French journalist based in Sweden. Then Barkha Dutt, हमारी अपनी. Farhan Bukhari is a journalist and works for the Financial Post and has been associated with many foreign publications and news agencies.
Financial Times.
Financial Times. I'm sorry. FT should have been. So, to begin with it, I think since our panel consists of journalists, so it has to be about journalism. How does journalism portray, reflect, explore images of the day? And that is that it's the task, the assignment of the media to explore the reality of the situation as it exists. And it does that on a daily basis with the breaking news syndrome. But then we have to see how well does it reflect the reality on the ground, how well does it analyze that reality, how well does it understand the events that are taking place. So, because generally we feel, and at least, and Barkha would agree and Farhan Bukhari would agree, and please agree with both of them, that the media
You have to agree with us.
that the media in at least Pakistan and to a large extent in India has not really been the part of the solution, and it is increasingly becoming a part of the problem. The way it trivializes, scandalizes, the way it looks at the sensational aspects of it, the way it polarizes society. So that's the general feeling. But Olivier comes from another background, and perhaps it will be interesting for us to hear what he has to say on this.
So you mean that the European newspapers don't trivialize and don't scandalize?
Do all of them do all?
I was supposed to agree about that too.
Yes.
No, of course they do also, and I mean I don't know whether they are part of the problem, as you said, like in Pakistan and India. But I think that there is a huge diversity of newspapers and magazines in France, when I comes from, and in Sweden, where I'm working, where I've been working the past 20 years as a correspondent. Excuse me? Here? Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you. Quite impressive now. I mean, I'm working for a daily newspaper which is called Le Monde, which is tried to be a very serious newspaper, meaning quite boring, and which is very good for a newspaper to be boring, because you have to be. It's a very serious stuff. Because, as you said, you have to give the right tools to the readers if they want to understand the situation. But even for a newspaper like Le Monde, which is we try to be as neutral as possible. I will not try to define neutrality, but we get attacked all the time, because we are accused to be a partisan on the left, on the right, and so on and so on. Sometimes we are accused to be trivializing the situation, and so on. So, and it's even worse now with internet, and because we are, as newspapers, we have less and less readers on the print, but more and more readers on the internet. And then the comments on the internet are I would say, more part of the problem than the newspaper itself. But
the social media, or
the social media. I mean, you know, when you publish an article on the internet, on the Le Monde's website, then the readers can comment, and then often I can see that part of the problem is in the comments.
Balkha, we have come to social media.
Well, I already spoke a lot about that in the morning.
Yes. But we have shuffled the audience.
Okay, for those who haven't heard me in the morning, I was talking about how social media has created a reductionist narrative, and you know, people today are asked to take sides either in ideological camps or political camps. Nuance and complexity is shrinking, and when people can't label you, you tend to be called biased from all sides. You know, and because people want to slot you easily, and a lot of people who don't have thick skins, वो थोड़ा डर जाते हैं, because there's so much venom and poison and toxicity on social media that people people feel the pressure to take positions that they think will make them popular. And I always say that a journalist's job is not to be popular. A lot of young people in India ask me, you know, what does it take to be a journalist? And my answer is always a willingness to be unpopular. Too many journalists, I think, today are seeking popularity. And I think social media is a syndrome of that, because there's an instant feedback, and you know, you want to be liked. And it's a big human failing. We all have it. We all want to be liked. But as journalists, you have to be willing to be disliked. But one of the words that Olivier used that struck me as very important is the word boring. You know, people like me and my channel, we suffer from this label in India, because we are today dealing with a media environment where you know, a lot of you must have heard of Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky had a phrase called manufacturing consent. And I like to say that Chomsky's been turned on his head, and now it's become all about manufacturing dissent. And there are a number of TV channels today where it's just this dialectics of artificial confrontation. So you put people, you choose extreme voices deliberately, you set them off against each other, they shout a lot, people think it's absurd, but they're entertained by it, then they crib about it later, but they watch it. And there are those of us who are more sober, who are more complex, who are more nuanced, and we're called boring. And I think that this word boring today has really come to be a challenge for those of us who want to be serious. We don't want to be theatrical, we don't want to be entertainers. That's not what I became a journalist for. But we are really dealing, और मैं यहाँ भी देखती हूँ, मैं पाकिस्तान टेलीविजन चैनल्स देखती हूँ, मुझे लगता है कि ये ट्रेंड यहाँ भी आ चुका है. This trend has come here as well.
नहीं, यहाँ तो बहुत तेजी से आया है, बहुत गहरा है.
ये crisis है. This is a crisis for journalism. That news has become theatre.
Yes. Oh yes. News has become theatre.
आपको ड्रामा देखना है तो आप न्यूज़ क्यों देखते हैं?
हाँ.
It's a real crisis for old style journalists like me. I'm hearing him say this.
Yes.
Today, if I saw television channels and I was 16 years old, I would not want to become a journalist.
I think if you stop watching news on news channels, I think you'll be less.
नहीं सर, सारे mediums में ये हो रहा है. अखबारों में भी pressure है. There is pressure on the print medium, social media certainly. There's a pressure on all mediums today to be inflammatory, to be provocative. Now you look at the online world. How do you measure the success of a website? You measure the success of a website based on the number of hits an
yes.
article gets. The number of hits an article gets tends to be on how outrageous it's going to be. So outrageousness, provocativeness, a deliberate taking of a position you may not even believe because it may get you the eyeballs.
Huh.
This is a real crisis for our
Yes.
profession today.
Huh.
And it's globally. This is India, Pakistan, it's globally. I think
Yes.
it's a global crisis.
If we move to Farhan, what does one do about it?
Well, thank you,
Hey.
Vai Sahab. I've just come back from a trip to Balochistan. And like my previous trips to Balochistan, this time around as well.
Zara sa mic
Okay.
ke paas.
Is this better?
Yes.
Like my previous trips to Balochistan, I heard number of people in Quetta and other places complaining कि साहब आपके जो talk shows हैं वो यहाँ क्यों नहीं आते? The reason why talk shows don't go to Balochistan is because this dreadful mechanism, and I do call it dreadful, known as people's meter, which is used for
TRPs.
quote unquote
TRP.
ratings purposes, does not have an existence in Balochistan. And therefore, the discussions on Balochistan are typically hosted from Karachi or Lahore or Islamabad for that reason. ये सिर्फ एक एग्ज़ाम्पल है उस इन्वायरमेंट का जिसमें हम रहते हैं, जिसमें कमर्शलिज्म इतना ज़्यादा ड्राइविंग फोर्स बन गया है और रेटिंग्स जिसका दारोमदार जहाँ तक मुझे मालूम है इस चीज़ पे है कि लोग कितने ज़्यादा लोग अपने केबल ऑपरेटर्स के ज़रिए किसी एक चैनल को या किसी एक प्रोग्राम को किसी एक वक्त पे देखते हैं, उसके नतीजे में क्वालिटी डेफिनेटली डिक्लाइन पे है और सीरियस जर्नलिज्म इज़ badly compromised. I think you can just count barely on your fingertips the number of outlets in Pakistan which are still doing serious journalism. Dawn, the newspaper, is my first pick of the day because Dawn still has quality to offer of the kind that I would like to read early in the morning. So this is the downside risk and certainly is something that I'm very worried about. The other side, of course, is that when I stepped into journalism, which was almost 35 years ago, Pakistan lived in a very different environment. One of the darkest chapters in Pakistan's history, the 1980s. And I still remember that in 84, when I left Pakistan to go abroad for higher studies, I actually had to take an NOC from the government's Ministry of Education because I had been warned that I could be stopped at the airport given that my editor had received complaints on some of my activities in the previous 1 year. Now, you look at that background and you ask yourself कि यार ये तो पाकिस्तान था ही नहीं, पाकिस्तान वहाँ से निकल के आज एक दूसरी तरफ चला गया है. लोग बहुत बोलते हैं, कभी इतना ज़्यादा बोलते हैं और इतना ऊट पटांग बोलते हैं कि वो आप टीवी चैनल बंद करने को दिल चाहता है या टीवी चैनल बदलने को दिल चाहता है because it's completely unregulated. So then the question for me is that have we come to a point in time where some sensible regulation has to be put in place? Now, I have to be very careful as a journalist because I've always believed,
Never.
and I can see.
I would never. I would rather rather live with the churn of our industry than ever give governments in any country
ये
the
देखिए,
space to get into our
ये देखिए, and
you
then
cannot trust politicians in the media.
then-
You cannot. Of any
then the
party.
question is.
There is the concept of self-regulation.
हमारे हैं ना,
है।
हमारे
नहीं, वो आपके यहाँ है लेकिन वो यहाँ पे नहीं है and that was exactly the next point that I wanted to make. Can we look forward to a day where the self regulation would become sensible enough, responsible enough to take care of some of these excesses? I mean, content wise, sometimes, for example, it happens all the time that there is coverage of people targeting some people, in which it's the whole story is one-sided. The reporter and the news organization have not even cared to reach out to the person and given them an opportunity to
Right of response.
right of response, which in my book and certainly Barkha's book should be a fundamental and cardinal principle. वो नहीं हो रहा. सवाल ये है कि ये जिस एनवायरनमेंट में हम रहते हैं इसको बदलने के लिए और उस बेहतर फ़िज़ा में जाने के लिए हमें क्या करने की ज़रूरत है, and that I think is one of the biggest challenges faced by Pakistan journalism.
I mean, we can be joint anchors of this program.
अच्छा,
Okay.
joint four anchors. Chances are we won't agree on anything. वो हमारी profession की एक खासियत है. No, I just want to say that to give you a understanding of the Indian environment, we do have a self-regulating body that was actually headed by a former justice of the Supreme Court. So we do have a self-regulation code. But I want to say something a little controversial here. जहाँ हम लोग जाते हैं इंडिया में भी और यहाँ पे भी मुझे मालूम है कि आप लोगों के भी ये सवाल होंगे बहुत मीडिया बैशिंग होती है. A lot of people say, oh, you people just want to, you know, you're not interested in serious news. You just have these shouting matches. It's become a kind of absurdist drama, and I would agree with all of that. But then I think you as viewers and consumers of news also have to reflect on why you are making these products successful. क्योंकि बार बार हमें बोला जाता है that
ये
you
बहुत
are
important
you
point,
are
हाँ.
ratings hunters. But what is a TRP? What is a people's meter? It's all of you. Now, one very curious phenomenon we see in India is that we see people really, you know, moaning and criticizing of these channels, which are these, you know, very, very, I would say, often warmongering, often simplistic, hashtag driven, not very intelligent, there's no nuance, no complexity, but because they're entertaining, because उसमें तमाशा होता है, people tend to gravitate to watch the tamasha, then they want to discuss the tamasha over the dinner table, then they want to, you know, even if you're making fun of that channel, or you are still watching it. Because you're still watching it, you're giving that channel an advantage, you're allowing that kind of journalism to define the market. तो जब आप लोग कहते हैं हमसे कि आप लोग इस तरह की न्यूज़ क्यों करते हैं, तो आपको भी रिफ्लेक्ट करना होगा कि आप इस तरह की न्यूज़ क्यों देखते हैं.
ये सही है.
Valid point.
That's a point. Let's come to Olivia. Olivia, you are the only person among the panelists who is also a creative writer. You have written novels. I sometimes think that perhaps a novelist or a poet is better able to understand the situation that exists than a journalist. Would you agree with it?
I'm not sure, but it's an interesting idea. I mean, as a novelist, you get much more room
Yes.
to go into details, to go into nuances, to go into complexity. What you were talking about in the beginning, which is very difficult often to do in a newspaper. But as a journalist, you only, in principle, deal with facts. You don't have to care so much about facts. In a novel, even if my novels are very much based about documentation and about real stuff, but I think what a novel does allow it's to go into the complexity of human beings,
Yes.
in how they think, what makes them to take a decision, which is often a big source of frustration as a journalist, because you get facts, you meet people, you make interviews, they tell you what they have to do to sell, even if it's politicians or whatever, or corporates, and then you have to deal with that. If you don't have so much time to investigate, you have to write an article which is based on vague sources. If you have a lot of time, if you are working in a newspaper, we gives you room to investigate, then it's okay. But even then, you can get completely manipulated, and you will never go into the mind of the
No,
people.
what I was suggesting was that perhaps a creative writer understands the reality better than someone who is looking for mere facts.
I mean, I'm not sure they understand better, but a journalist can only deal with facts. So even he can understand something, but he cannot write about it because he
Yes.
cannot
Oh,
prove
yes.
it. And that's the limits of journalism. If you cannot prove it, you don't write it. A novelist don't have to prove it, so he can write and imagine and so on, and feel the
That's Bakha, throughout the world, I mean, mainly in the West, we see the circulations of newspapers dwindling, and people moving away from the print media. But this, what I have read about India and China, it seems that only in China and India, the print media has stayed strong and has gained circulation.
Yes.
Is
That
it
is
true
certainly.
and why?
It's certainly true for newspapers in India. I think it has something to do with the scale of our market also. And the fact that a lot of people are now preferring to read and consume news also in their own languages. So our regional media is also very strong. In fact, some of our state-based newspapers are, I would say, much more influential than our national newspapers. लेकिन जब लोग कहते हैं that print is dying, मुझे लगता है कि ये ठीक नहीं है. मुझे लगता है ये जो churn हम आज देख रहे हैं, जब टीवी शुरू हुआ था, newspapers were forced to readapt themselves. Newspapers had to respond to the challenge of TV. TV was disruptive. Today, TV is being forced to adapt itself to the disruptive nature of social media and new technology. We are having to deal with the fact that anyone who has a mobile phone today and an internet account is a potential journalist. So mainstream media is being challenged like never before. And you know, हम अपने बारे में सोचते थे कि हम gatekeepers हैं, हम check करके आपको खबर देते हैं. Today there is a churn because there is a democratization of news, there is a two-way dialogue. You can't stand today at a pulpit and lecture to people. वो आपको वापस lecture करेंगे. So it's become a very it's become a very cacophonic space. You know, for lack of a better word, it's a very noisy space. क्योंकि मुझे लगता है मेनस्ट्रीम मीडिया ने अभी ये तय नहीं किया कि जो नई टेक्नोलॉजी है, नया सोशल मीडिया है, इसमें हम अपनी रेलेवेंस कैसे बनाए रखें. क्योंकि सच तो ये, चाहे ये पाकिस्तान हो चाहे इंडिया हो, जो खबर है वो आपको अपने फ़ोन पे सुबह मिल ही जाती है. जिसके पास स्मार्टफोन है वो अपना, और आजकल सबके पास स्मार्टफोन है. सो व्हेन यू वॉच द 9 PM न्यूज़, यू नो लॉन्गर कमिंग टू इट टू वॉच द न्यूज़. यू आर कमिंग टू इट फॉर ईदर एनालिसिस और ओपिनियन और टू बी प्रोवोक्ड. So we also have to understand why our industry is changing.
Yes, but that originally should be the print media's task to analyze, to go into the background, to provide deeper analysis.
And it still does. In many cases, I still see that. In many cases, newspapers that have not reinvented themselves, जिसका front page, you see today, अगर आपका front page is yesterday night's 9 PM news, if the newspaper's front page is what you have already seen on the nightly news before, you're irrelevant. A newspaper is under much more pressure today to break stories. Because the mere chronicling of news is already being done by other mediums.
So more investigative reporting, more analysis. Farhan, with your experience of, because you have a larger interest in print media, but of course, FT aside, how do you look at the Pakistani print media, and has it changed in the context of how it can, its capacity to analyze, to explore, to come out with investigative reporting?
Well, as I said earlier on, parts of it are trying to adjust, and as I said, I start my day with Dawn. First .com, and then the newspaper, and then I look at the news as well. And Dawn is certainly a very good example in our country. The big downside of Dawn is of course that it doesn't really have a competitor in its own class. But Dawn is one newspaper which I think is a very good example of adjusting to a new environment. Dawn, incidentally, is also the one paper which I think has done more to give opportunities to women journalists to be on the front lines than other newspapers across Pakistan. So, for example, I know of a couple of news organizations which have refused women journalists who wanted to go on certain stories because of quote-unquote concerns about their safety. Whereas in the case of Dawn, you have some very fine young girls who go off to remote places, and of course there are security mechanisms. You just deal with that, and you go and you do the story and you come back. So I think it's somewhat patchy. As far as the Urdu press is concerned, Jung, I think, still has a very large presence all across Pakistan, and it's a widely read newspaper. One time, this was many years ago, I was up at Saif al-Muluk Lake in the north, and we went up there, and then we walked into a shop to have pakoda and chai. And I asked them कि जी आपका सबसे पहले न्यूज़पेपर कौन सा आता है? As a journalist I was interested. He said कि वो सुबह 9 बजे जीप आती है, उसमें सबसे पहले हमें जंग मिलता है. So in terms of the distribution, even around around Saif al-Muluk, which is really remote for people who may have been up there, jang is the way to go.
And you know, our part of the world is we are very political people. I think we are a very, very political, argumentative culture. आप छोटे से छोटे गांव में चले जाएं तो जो इंसान पढ़ सकता है वो अखबार पढ़ रहा है. So I think we are evolving in a different way. We are voracious consumers of news. We are extremely opinionated people. We like a good argument. So I think that there is no danger of news dying in our country. I think the danger is what are the principles by which we do news and what are the principles by which news is consumed. But there is an abiding interest in all things political.
Oliver.
Just two comments
Yes.
about what has been said. First, that's just talking about Le Monde because it's a newspaper I know the best. The print audience has decreased extremely because of internet and so on. That's right. But our global audience, thanks to internet, thanks to the mobile, has increased.
Yes.
I mean,
The global audience of the print media, of the mainstream print media,
of Le Monde,
of Le Monde,
as a
Le Monde as a newspaper,
as a newspaper,
which is, I think people here may not be aware that Le Monde is the newspaper of record in France.
Yeah.
But it is an afternoon daily. It is an afternoon daily.
Yes. And today I think we have a circulation of maybe 300,000 issue, which is very little for a print. But with the internet and mobile and everything, and the tablets, we have. I think we have between 5 and 7 million readers a day, which we could never dream about for 20 years ago. So our audience is much bigger. And the second. Talking about the what kind of news analysis newspaper has to bring. I've been a journalist for 30 years. I've been working both for daily newspaper and weekly news magazines. And what we see today with the pressure of the put by the internet of the print paper is that what the kind of analysis, the kind of articles which used to be published in the weekly newspapers for 20 years ago, now it's done by the daily newspapers because they have to bring this analysis, not to be after, because everything is already on the internet. So you have to bring something. It's every day. Le Monde, we are publishing a weekly news magazine every day. That's what we are doing with analysis and so on.
Because traditionally a newspaper was meant for the city where it is published or if it is a national newspaper. Now if more people read it on internet, spread across the world, what is the influence of a newspaper? What kind of change it can make? This is a question.
Well, I think that in our country, the net is still evolving because the penetration is not as deep as maybe parts of Europe or North America.
Can a newspaper, and that's what is expected of a newspaper or of a media,
Why should the impact of a newspaper change if you consume it on the internet instead of in...
No, for instance, all politics is local.
Right.
And the news has to be local in that sense. And if somebody in Spain is reading Le Monde, and the Le Monde is campaigning for something in Paris,
But
what does it mean?
But globalization and localization are parallel tracks of our world, right? So when the terror attacks happen in Paris, it is everybody's story. And when you tell a local story, you have to universalize it so that the whole world is interested. You see, this is the thing we have to talk about. जब हम words और images की बात करते हैं, we became journalists because we were interested in the art of storytelling. We all tell stories in different ways, through fiction, through non-fiction, through interviews, through columns. लेकिन आखिर में वही एक art है, the art of storytelling. And you're a good artist if you can make the Paris terror attack and the sex ratio in India speak in the same way to the same consumer.
But
that tests your skill
yes,
as,
but,
as a storyteller.
but with the kind of media coverage that these big events demand or get,
Ji.
does not the story itself change with the presence of the media?
It has, to some extent.
How, Farhan?
Farhan?
It has, but I think, you know, we need to step back a bit,
Yes.
because what is journalism? Where did it start from? What we are talking about here are the tools that have evolved over the years, the internet being the latest one. But fundamentally, it's about content. It's about what you have to write and what you have to say, and reliability. Because mind you, part of the problem with the social media is that there's a lot of stuff which is just not true, which is partially not true or just not true. I mean, there are blogs which come across my desk, especially on various politicians, and we try to check them out. Not every blog, but some of them. They are completely somebody's figment of somebody's imagination. So then, you know, it just gets back to writing reliably with a certain quality, and if you can do that, of course, people will respond to that.
Now shifting, I mean, to another issue. What is public service broadcasting? Is it something? Has it any potential to compensate for the excesses of the mainstream media?
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I'm not aware of how that works in India, but recently I was part of a discussion on public sector, public interest,
Yes.
not public sector, but public interest broadcasting in our context. And somebody who's very senior in one of the TV channels said कि वो हमने जब लाइसेंस लिया था तब वो कोई कमिटमेंट्स की थी, लेकिन उसके बाद कौन सोचता है वाली बात वो unfortunately, because again you know, without necessarily arguing for the government to regulate, but there should be some framework within which and it should be internal, it should be done by news organizations themselves.
I'd be very wary of that.
But Barkha, there's another issue there, which is that I've also seen in the last 20-30 years weakening of news editors, and
No,
I
that's
think
true.
that is part of the problem as well.
It's
which
the
then
same in
takes us-
India. It's the same in India. The editor has almost disappeared.
Well, the tyranny of the market, you know, people often ask you how often do politicians interfere in your story. In my experience, politicians have, मुझे 20 साल हो गए, I don't know a politician who ever managed to get a story killed. But what does take stories off the pages, off prime time, is a calculation that your market is not interested in it. So actually the market determines the content much more than any pressure from politicians. I will say that, in any vibrant democracy at least. That said, there is a problem that none of us have genuine public broadcasters. Our public broadcasters are not autonomous. They are not free from government control. We have not seen a BBC-like model in our part of the world, and I doubt we're going to see one either. And broadcasting faces a problem that newspapers and the internet doesn't, that it is prohibitively expensive. So there are only two ways to finance television news. One is the state, so you have Qatar financing Al Jazeera, or the license fees of BBC, or you have corporates. So yehi do tarike hain finance karne ke liye. It does have its own consequence on content. I'm not going to deny that there is a market-driven orientation to content, and just like you say, Balochistan doesn't make it to the news. हम लोगों को पूछा जाता है कि हमारे farmer suicides हैं, वो कभी prime time news पे नहीं आते, because you know, we've also become increasingly classist as societies. Our societies have become more unequal. Our viewers are not interested in this, so we tend to not tell those stories often enough. But I cannot agree again with you because this thing of codifying what is public interest is a little bit like defining what is national interest, is a little bit like defining what is nationalism, is a little bit like defining what is good, what is bad. I don't want to give any government the right to tell me what is appropriate for me as a journalist to do.
But suppose we define public interest broadcasting as broadcasting that is not controlled by commercial interests.
तो उसके पैसे देगा कौन? और अगर सरकार देगी तो वो free कैसे होगा? How I have not seen a model in our part of the world which is editorially independent and yet financed by the state. मैंने तो देखा नहीं ऐसा. और I do not believe that I will see such a, I mean, the point is you
तो
have to be,
कोई उपाय नहीं है.
आप मुझे बताइए कि आपके पीटीवी में या हमारे दूरदर्शन में कितना आपको ऑनेस्टी मिलता है कंटेंट का? How often is PTV or
Yes.
Doordarshan able to criticize their governments?
Olive, what is your experience? What is your experience? One thing which Barkha raised and which is very true for Pakistan also, that people are obsessed with politics, totally obsessed with politics.
Yes.
Even though there is no democracy, but obsession with politics
There is no
continue.
democracy?
Even when. And the other thing is about the public interest broadcasting. What is your experience and how does it happen in France or Sweden?
I mean, public service is, we should have to define, because in Sweden, in France, I mean, in Sweden, the public service is license finance, there is a fee. In France, you have advertisement also on the public service. So it's a kind of middle way. In both countries, public service is, even it's, you could think.
Is there state media in both countries? The state media, government media?
Not that way, no.
No.
It's not that way. But I mean, they are competing about the audience,
Yes.
because their mission is to.
And the share of politics in the content.
Excuse me?
Politics, how much politics dominate the coverage of the media?
I mean, people are just mad about politics, like here. Yes,
Yes.
the same.
It's the same.
Yes, of course.
About the same. I think we have just about 17, 18 minutes for the audience to take part in this. And again, if there are any questions, I see 3 hands raised. And
4.
And
5.
5. Okay, let's begin. And if you want to identify the panelists that you are asking question, please do that. चले इनको दे दे पहले. अच्छा ये कुछ the mics are अच्छा हाँ तो ये
So,
That just comes from being a TV journalist. I know how to speak it.
बरखा को आता है कि माइक कितने करीब होठों के होना चाहिए, जैसे वो जो पॉप सिंगर्स होते हैं ना, बिल्कुल लगा के.
मेरा सवाल बरखा दत्त से है.
हाँ.
जी.
पाकिस्तान में तो ये देखा गया है कि जो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया है, न्यूज़ का नेगेटिव जो एस्पेक्ट है उसको बार बार रिपीट करके दिखाते हैं, और बाकी न्यूज़ का जो पॉजिटिव एस्पेक्ट है वो बहुत थोड़ा सा दिखाते हैं. क्या इंडिया में वैसा ही है कि इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया बार बार दिखाता है, पॉजिटिव कम दिखाता है?
देखिए, हमारे प्रोफेशन के बारे में बहुत कुछ क्रिटिसाइज करने को है, लेकिन ये बात मुझे समझ नहीं आती. हमसे बार बार पूछा जाता है कि आप लोग पॉजिटिव क्यों नहीं दिखाते, पर हम पब्लिक रिलेशंस पीपल तो नहीं है ना. हमारा काम है कि जो गलत होता है, जब कुछ खराब होता है, जब कुछ ट्रेजेडी होती है, कोई करप्शन होता है, कोई स्कैंडल होता है, कोई इनजस्टिस होती है, हमारा काम है उसको आवाज देना. That doesn't mean we never tell stories of hope. That doesn't mean we don't tell stories of amity. But I do believe that we're not here for feel-good news. The job of a journalist is to chase all that is wrong, or to be a bridge between the viewer and any place you are in. If you're in a remote place, you're covering a war, a riot, a tsunami. तो मैं इससे सहमत नहीं हूँ.
जी वो जो लाल कमीज है उनको दे दें.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is for Miss Barkha Dutt. First of all, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We are thanking to this KLF for inviting you to Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
And my question is, you said that why we don't choose the content.
Why do you not reject content that you don't respect? You know, a lot of people, ये हमारे देश में भी होता है, they don't respect that television content but they watch it. It creates a real big problem for the rest of us who don't believe in that kind of journalism.
But what I want to say, that the situation comes when we see that our media is so weak, so weak to resist. because of the greed or because of so many other things.
Resist what?
For example, if you remember in 2013, the paid content, a paid TVC was being played on all TV channels from channel 1 to channel 99. And secondly, that from channel 1 to channel 99, that every channel which was playing that paid TVC was based on the content provided by the government and the money to play it, to show it, provided by the government. But no one resisted, and no one, I mean, the scholars, the authors, everyone who sits over it, no one condemned it.
I'm not really familiar with some of the debates here related to Pakistan media, except that, as I was saying in the morning, I find that a lot of your channels here and a lot of our channels there, I don't know about this paid content thing, I'm not familiar with it, so I can't comment on it, but this deliberate choosing of extreme voices to shout at each other is something I'm very uncomfortable with. But I will still maintain that a lot of that kind of television gets watched and it gets discussed, and it really shrinks the options for the rest of us who don't believe in that kind of journalism.
Assalamu alaikum. For my question to you as well, Barkha, and thank you.
Am I going to take all the questions? That's not fair.
Thank you so much again to come to Pakistan. We really welcome you.
Thank you so much.
My question is that I don't live in Pakistan, so I get to see a lot of Indian news channels as well.
Yes.
And I am really, if I say embarrassed, to be part of the subcontinent where the media is playing such an unbelievably poor role on both sides. I mean, पहले मुझे लगता था हमारे channels ये करते हैं, but I think Indian channels भी यही करते हैं. दोनों साइडों पे इतना ज़्यादा hate mongering और इतना ज़्यादा छोटी छोटी बातों को negative करके और बिल्कुल एक, you know, there is, and that's why when somebody like you comes to Pakistan, it's a big thing for us because there is people-to-people contact, and you see millions of people who are not hate mongers and who are not negative and who are very fairly open about relationships with India as a neighbor and everything. So my question to you specifically is, what iconic journalists like yourself, आप ज़रा सा भी softer image लेती हैं पाकिस्तान के बारे में तो बहुत ज़्यादा criticism आपको face भी करनी पड़ती है social media में. I've seen that. I follow your Twitter account as well. So what can an iconic journalist like you, somebody like Kamran Khan in Pakistan and people like Ghazi Salahuddin, what kind of role can they play to calm things down on both sides, okay? Because आप लोग shape कर रहे हैं narrative पाकिस्तान के बारे में और इस relationship के बारे में. So what can you do differently to make things normalize between these two neighbors who have to coexist for the entire life?
Okay, so I agree with you that there is a lot of shrillness and a lot of warmongering that goes on both of our channels. And you know, ये सिर्फ इंडिया में प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, यहाँ भी प्रॉब्लम है. एक ज़माना होता था, मैं यहाँ आती थी, I was a regular, मतलब दोस्त हैं सारे, टेलीविजन एंकर सब बुलाते थे. Now nobody wants to get locked into the तमाशा of an India-Pakistan television debate.
टाकरा.
Nobody, मतलब मैं तो अब मैं जाती ही नहीं. I rather talk to people like this, क्योंकि मैं देखती हूँ कि everybody इतना polarized हो गया है ये conversation कि कुछ भी, मतलब everybody is defensive, या everybody is aggressive, या everybody is defensive. कोई अपने दिल से बात ही नहीं करता, कोई बैलेंस तरीके से बात ही नहीं करता. अब मैंने सुबह बोला यहाँ पर, और मुझे दोनों बात सही लगती है. मुझसे अनुपम खेर के बारे में पूछा गया, मैंने कहा it's a big disappointment that he's not here. I really wish that he'd got his visa instantly so that he was here and all of you maybe could argue with him, he could argue with you. लेकिन ये मुझे लगता है, I wish he hadn't been denied a visa. लेकिन मुझे ये भी लगता है कि हम में से जो भारत से यहाँ आए हैं, we are no less proud Indians because we're here. Whether it's Salman Khurshid is in the audience, there's me, there's any number of people. तो लोगों को एक गलत फहमी हो गई है that if you if you're a proud patriot of your country, if you admire your military, as I certainly do mine, you can't be a spokesperson for peace. Or if you're a spokesperson for peace, then यही होगा कि आप बस वाघा पे खड़े मोमबत्तियां हिला रहे हैं. अरे नहीं यार, हम भी, मतलब हमारा भी दिमाग है. We are realistic, we are pragmatic people. There are things about Pakistan that disturb me. There are things about my own country that disturb me. I think the only thing we can do is to not seek populism. I keep coming back to this need to be liked by the mass. ये एक बहुत dangerous चीज़ है, ये एक बहुत cowardly चीज़ है. ये मुझे लगता है कि dogma से दूर रहना और populism से दूर रहना हम दोनों देशों के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है.
May I intervene? Irrespective of what you say, and which is true that there are harsh voices and they choose most extreme points of view, but isn't there something inherent in the media to unsettle you, to disturb you?
What disturbs me is the absence of conversations that are in the center. I as an individual, I do not belong to the right of the ideological or the political spectrum, and I do not belong to the left. I am not a neoliberal, I am not a Marxist, I am not a jingoist, I am not a peacenik. I don't like these labels. What disturbs me in the media is the inability to speak without labels.
Yes. Can we pose the same question to both Farhan and Olivia? Is it not inherent in the very medium that it disturbs you, that unsettles you, creates conflicts in your mind? Is the media as a message, going back to McLuhan, if the medium is the message, is the message itself not the problem?
Or is the medium itself not the problem?
Media,
Is what you're
yes,
asking.
oh yes. What do you think?
Well,
Farhan, would you?
Barkha is going to intensely disagree with me.
I'm already shaking my head in anticipation.
But I just think, look, from the time that I started out in journalism, which I said earlier on was a difficult period in Pakistan's history, I think the media has evolved in ways that I'm not very comfortable with. And whether it should be self-regulation or better than that, some mechanism to reinstate the authority and independence of the editor, because across Pakistan there are far too few independent editors left. Something has to be done somewhere, because it's right now, I don't want to get into naming names, but there's some news organizations where people are, effectively free for all. There are no editorial sort of discussions or again, don't want to use the word controls in a negative sense, but there has to be some sense of responsibility, and I see plenty of that. For example, many news organizations around the world, typically in print, use a jargon known as a lawyer. Copies have to be passed through a full-time lawyer just to make certain that it falls within acceptable legal bounds. That doesn't happen here.
But can I just say one thing?
So organizations have to be more responsible.
But on the mediums do not dumb down content. People do. There's no point blaming the medium.
No,
when I started television, I'm one of the few people in my country who's a first generation television journalist. Otherwise, most people had moved from print into TV. And people said, TV is inherently a less intelligent medium. I don't think so. I think people are intelligent or people are not intelligent. People dumb down content. Mediums don't. Why do we think some mediums are shallow? Mediums are not shallow, people are.
Olivia, just a moment. Olivia, what do you think about these views, that is media itself in the context of how, let's see, the digital media has spread? Was it not inevitable with this spread to have the results that we have? Could it have been otherwise?
I mean, I don't know how to answer such a question, because the media are so different. I mean, they have been answering these questions and this question, and I still, I mean, if you put all the media on the same level, you don't get a good right picture of the situation.
So let's go back to yes.
I want to say one thing, because
Ji.
I happen to be one of those people from here. I go on a lot of Indian talk shows.
Hold your mic.
And what I have noticed is a lot of people have commented to me in the last 1 year, why don't you ever raise your voice when you're answering questions? I don't. And it has reached a point that even other than Times now, I think I've been on all the major channels. they listen. As long as you have something substantial to say, and as long as you're not going into the blame game, if they are asking you a legit question, now I'm talking about Indians to us, if they are asking you a question, instead of saying, oh, but you did that, did this, that happened, this happened, we're not talking about that right now. So I have actually been able to say, I don't ever talk against Pakistan, but I've actually managed to say things to the anchors, and they listen. And some of them are very right-wing, jingoistic anchors. What I'm trying to say is, again, to her, that media can play a big role because it all depends on the anchor and what they want you to say, how they want the debate to go.
But can I ask you who these people are who do appear on Times Now? We're all very curious. Who these Pakistanis are who go every day to be shouted at? I really would, if you could share.
You know, I
always see two generals sitting there.
I've asked a couple of them, and they say, oh, but don't you see what we do to Arnab Goswami? I said, no, you don't. All he manages to do is yell at you, tell you to shut up, actually like shut up, and this is rubbish and nonsense, and they say, no, we do the same thing to him.
Let's have another question. There, Ayla.
I just thought that state media ko you've sort of brushed it away.
Yes.
There's just can we look at NPR as a उधर भी अमेरिका में भी उतनी जहालत है जितनी probably यहाँ पे. How do they deal with this state media? That NPR is a state-owned organization.
But the political culture is different, right? I mean, National Public Radio, NPR.
That's a point that
the political culture is different. We have to acknowledge that.
Much would depend on what a society is, the level of its awareness, openness, education, the kind of culture that it has, the freedoms that it has, and that would have an impact on the kind of media that you have. Because when I watch discussions on BBC, I can see that it is how they have been brought up. It is how they exchange their views. It's the quality of their upbringing and their the education that they have.
I mean, I don't know who wants to take that, but it's also the political culture. You see, it's not about...
Yes.
NPR works in the United States of America because there is a very, very strong emphasis, A, on free speech, and B, the American president will come and even do a show for YouTube. In our countries, we struggle to get big politicians. People have egos, they don't want to do debates, they'll say, oh please come, you interview us one-on-one, they don't want to take another point of view. Our political culture is not oriented towards being so informal and open and accessible.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think we will have two more questions. We'll draw the lots or what? चलिए एक आप पूछ लीजिए.
Well, my name is Nasir, and I'm.
And ये question बरखा से तो नहीं है ना?
It's to all of you, but especially I want to point out to Barkha because she is center of attention. This is to you, ma'am. And actually, we have a lot of Twitter following you, and I think and there is a code word, and if you just want to wrangle a journalist, if you want to point out a journalist, you want to point out his flaws, you just give a code word, lifafa culture. In
that is our, in Pakistan we know what lifafa.
We used to do it. I mean, I think what is your take on the wrong journalism? It's not about all the journalists are transparent.
No,
what do you take on?
But there is no profession where everyone is good. They are all politicians honest? Are all journalists great? Are all lawyers fine people? No. Every profession has some bad apples. Every profession also takes a little bit of time to institutionalize what is acceptable, what is not. I think private television in both of our countries is very young. The media is still exploding. Strangely, one of the things that's happened in both our countries is usually competition is meant to improve quality. I would say in both our countries, competition has actually led to a decline in quality. But that doesn't mean that we can run away from the fact that that competition is here to stay. So let's not pretend that we can go back to some old sepia tinted days of there were only 2 channels, tab bahut acha hota tha. Nahi, tab bhi bahut acha nahi hota tha. The fact is the media is constantly changing, consumers are changing, there are new challenges, technology changes you. तो लफाफा जर्नलिज्म आपके यहाँ हमारे यहाँ भी हमारे इलेक्शन कमीशन ने पेड न्यूज़ की एनालिसिस की थी. ये हर प्रोफेशन में होता है कि there are gaps in ethical standards. And then there is a pushback from viewers, from institutional bodies, and you know, I don't think we should tarnish professions. I find that very lazy media bashing.
Shelley.
I hope the last question is not going to be to me now. I've been answering questions all day.
The last question, and I had promised Olivier that there will be a question for him. Shelley.
No.
Yes. दे दें उनको.
Let the audience decide.
Mr. Khurshid is here now. He's going to answer some questions instead of
My name is Anam.
He himself.
Upfront, my apologies. You know, my question is once again directed towards Barkha. There is a recent. My apologies. Since so much is happening in India, I have to refer to those developments. A lot of groups have emerged in India, which have tried to, stifle free expression. You have very rightly pointed out in your book as well. How scary is it for you as a journalist not to say few things in today's India?
मैंने सुबह इसका जवाब बहुत लेंथ पे दिया था. Probably you were not there. I said that I believe that there is a certain hyperbolic quality to this. ये आपको impression है कि हम अपना mind नहीं speak करते. ये बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं है. I have never held back from saying what I believe. It may get me galis on social media, but that's about the only casualty that one has to make for speaking your mind. तो ठीक है वो गाली देते रहे. बाकी जो मैंने सुबह बोला था मैं दोबारा रिपीट कर देती हूँ. मुझसे बार बार पूछा जाता है कि आपके देश में जो टॉलरेंस डिबेट चल रही है उसके बारे में आप क्या कहेंगे. और मैंने सुबह भी बोला, मैं दोबारा भी रिपीट करती हूँ. I don't accept that India is less tolerant today. I don't accept that. I believe that the tolerance debate has been politicized by both overstatement and understatement on both sides of our political spectrum. जहाँ मुझे intolerance दिखती है वो बस इसी में दिखती है कि जब हम conversation करते हैं, the intolerance is for another point of view. The intolerance is not religious. The intolerance is your and my ability to talk to each other and listen to each other if we disagree. That is the only intolerance that worries me.
Thank you, Barkha. And before we conclude, आपसे एक बात पूछनी है. Was there a Barkha tweet during this program?
Was there a?
Was there a Barkha tweet during this program?
No. But I will be tweeting after this.
Thank you so much. And I must thank my panelists, Olivier, Barkha and Farhan.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for being such a good audience.
Thank you.
Shukriya bahut.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session in this hall will be the Mushaira at 6:45 p.m. Thank you.